If you have the time to read, if you have the time to be on social media, if you have the time to be doing anything else that has nothing to do with work, that has nothing to do with your kids, that has nothing to do with you taking care of yourself and making sure that you're intact and your self-care is all good. If you have any time to do anything else, that means you have time to do that thing that you said that you want to do. So just go out there and do it. Hey queens. Yeah, you know who you are. God, come on. Go ahead and put that crown on your head. Now tilt a little to the left. Now a little to the right. Perfect. Now let's get to work. Because we know you got big goals. And you got big dreams and not afraid to let them know. Why? Because you step into your purpose. You speak out on your faith. And you shift up in your journey. Because you a boss. Welcome to the podcast, Drop the Expiring Act with your host, Veli of QueenBayGoals.com, reminding you that you are a queen before anything else. It's your life and your goals. Make it royal. All right, y'all. Go ahead and work that crown. Hey. Welcome back to episode 5 of the Drop the Aspiring Act podcast. This is your girl, Veli. And this week we are talking about, what are we talking about? Act like a writer, think like you're a reader. So happy Wednesday. This week we are going to get into a little bit about content creators. So if you are a writer, and it's not just for writers, right? If you are an aspiring author or you are anybody who creates content that is going to be consumed by an audience other than yourself, other than your family, other than your friends, and this is probably a podcast that you should listen to. So remembering that this series, we're doing the Act Like, Think Like series. So part of dropping your aspiring act is starting to take action. And then also starting to take a look at the mindsets that we have and the mindsets that we need to shift to. So act like a writer, think like a reader. This one is all about the content that you're creating and the people that you're sharing it to. So let's start with the act like part of it. So act like a writer. And I'm going to go with some words from my virtual mentor, Shonda Rhimes. So let me pull it up right quick. And if anybody who doesn't know who Shonda Rhimes is, just sleeping under a rock. Because she is one of the creators of Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, Grey's Anatomy, Private Practice. And I think she has her own Shondaland thing now. And I can't remember which one is it, Netflix or Hulu. One of them, she's running her own shows on there. It's something that I don't have, and I'm mad about it because I love all her shows, and now I'm not able to see whichever one she's streaming online because I don't have those streaming apps or whatever they are. But we'll get it together. But back on topic, right? Act like a writer. And she says, I don't know if you ever seen this in her commercials because I think she does like a master class or something like that. And in the commercial, you always hear her say, you're either a writer or you're not a writer, right? You may not be a working writer, but you're either a writer or you're not. And if so, you're either going to write or you don't write. So to me, it's just you're a writer. Go write. Prove yourself to be a writer. So for this Act Like series, I'm just going to keep it short, right? If you are a writer, just write. If you are an artist, just paint. If you are a singer, just sing. If you are a dancer, just dance. Whatever it is that you want to do, I just need you to start doing it, right? Because a lot of times when we're aspiring artists, aspiring singers, aspiring dancers, aspiring creators, we spend a lot more time in research mode and doing everything else under the sun but the actual thing that we want to do. So I'm going to keep it simple this week, and we're just going to say whatever it is that you want to do, just start doing it. So if that's an author, just write. If that's a dancer, just dance. If that's a singer, just sing. Keep it simple. Start doing the thing. Because here's the thing. If you don't start doing the thing, at some point you are going to lose those gifts or whatever it is that you have. You're going to lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? And if you are, and I'm just going to stick with the title, if you are an author and you're not writing, what's going to happen to your writing skills, right? Because at some point, every author, they start at a point and then they elevate from there, right? So some people start out as good authors and then they're just excellent and they shoot off into the the New York Times bestseller list. And then some of them start way out where their first books are like, trash. And then by the time they get around to their fifth book, they're like, great. But if you aren't writing, if you aren't putting your content out there, if you aren't having your books in people's hands with a finished end product, how are you going to know where you are, right? How are you going to know where you are, and then how are you going to know where you need to get to? How are you going to work on your craft if you're not doing anything? So, act like a writer. Just do the dang thing and write. Okay? That's all I'm going to talk about for the act like part this week. So if you are a singer, just sing. If you're a dancer, just dance. Go out there and do the thing. Even if you're just doing it for yourself because you don't understand how to get into the industry, or you're just waiting on like some big break, just go out there and do it on YouTube or something, right? At some point you might be discovered, or find dance studios in your neighborhood. Go out there and do the thing and stop making excuses. Just go do it. And we're going to talk about excuses at the end when we get into the core of the podcast. Excuse me. So now we are going to go into the part where it's think like a reader. But guess what it says? Think like your reader. It doesn't say think like any reader. It says think like your reader. So this one we are talking about not just taking any good old body's advice, right? So a lot of people have opinions. A lot of people want to give you their opinion, but they're not necessarily your target audience. They're not necessarily the people who are going to be consuming your content in the masses. So make sure when you're getting advice from people, you're getting it from people who you expect to normally consume your content, right? Don't just give it to your friend and be like, here, read this. And they're like, oh, I don't like this. It sucks. Well, if they're not your target audience, who cares what their opinion is, right? And if you're doing something like for kids, for example, and kids, they probably can't give you the real truth about what it is that they feel about, whether it's a book or a painting or something that you have done for kids. You give it to the parents and you tell the parents, look, I need you to read this book to your kids and then tell me this expressions that they had on their faces as you were reading it, right? Or what were they doing while they were reading? Was the book so boring that the kid just went off and did something else, right? So in context, if you have something like that where you can't get the feedback directly from the people who are going to consume it, you go to the next best thing. You go to the next best person who's going to get that feedback from them, those people who know their kids. Because if you are getting advice about children's book from, for example, a friend who doesn't even have kids, it's why? Why would you even take that advice, right? Because they don't have kids. They don't know. Unless they work in a place that has kids all the time. Well, let me back up. Unless they work in a daycare and they're around kids 24/7, right? They can probably give you advice. But if it's somebody who doesn't have kids and you're doing something for kids, they can't give you any advice. So, and I also say think like your reader, because a lot of people also write for their agents, or they write for their publishers, right? And they write to their agents or their publishers' taste. But at the end of the day, you have to remember that your agents and your publishers, sometimes they're not the person who is going to be consuming your work at the end of the day. So for those of you who especially are authors or aspiring authors, do something have a beta group of people that you invite to read some parts of your book. You don't have to give away the whole thing, right? But have them come in to read some parts of your book, to give you advice, to give you feedback. And I'm not saying necessarily don't listen to your agent, because your agent might be saying, if you're writing let's say a vampire book, right? If you're writing a vampire book and you give it to your agent and everybody says that they love the book, the people who you're giving it to, and your agent is like, well, vampire books are not doing well right now in the market, right? If you write a werewolf book, maybe I'll take the werewolf book, but vampires are not doing good right now. Now, I'm not saying don't take that agent's advice, because they might be right? Some people might still be not over this. Who's the triangle? The Bella, Jacob, Edward thing, right? They're that was the last book they wanted to read about vampires and werewolves, and they don't want to read anything else right now. in the market. So maybe you need to hold that book for like maybe 5 years when people have got that 3 out of their head and they're ready for something new. So I'm not saying don't listen to your agent for stuff like that. Maybe that's something that you need to listen to an agent for. But when it comes to the actual content in your book, make sure you're getting advice from people who are actually going to be consuming your content, right? But then it takes us back into, because we're going to wrap this thing up with a bow, it takes us right back into the acting like a writer. Because guess what? You can't have these beta groups. You can't ask people for advice. You can't get feedback on something if you don't have anything, right? If you haven't created anything, if you haven't finished a book, if you haven't finished a song, if you haven't done any type of choreography for a dance, if you haven't painted the picture, right? If you haven't done anything, there's nothing for anybody to consume. There's nothing for anybody to review. There's nothing for anybody to give you feedback on. So it all wraps up into a little bubble. Act like a writer, which means go out there and do the damn work and start writing. If you're a content creator, go out there and create the content for your people to consume. And then think like a reader. So make sure you go out there and you get feedback from the people who you actually expect to consume your work. And there's so many different ways that you can go about doing that. So we are going to wrap up the podcast. And you see, I kept this week's podcast short, right? Because if you listened to the podcast last week, you know I was on my little soapbox for a minute. So I'm reeling it back in just a little bit this week. So we're going to get to the quote of the podcast, which means that the podcast is about to come to an end. And this week's podcast quote is from our Stephen King. Is he one of? Oh yeah, he is one of the episodes. I think it's Act Like J.K. Rowling, Think Like Stephen King. I think that's episode like 9 or 10 or something. It's coming down the line. But this week's quote is from Stephen King, and it says, "If you don't have time to read, you don't have time or the tools to write." Simple as that. So that's Stephen King's quote. And you know I have to do my twist on the quote, which is, if you have the time to read, you have the time to write. And that's by Valley, the Drop the Expired Acts podcast host. So basically what I'm saying is, if you have the time to read, and when I say read, I'm not just talking about read a book, right? I'm also talking about those of you that are spending time on social media, just reading and scrolling through text. And if you got time to do that, you got time to do whatever it is that you say you want to do. Like for me, I know I had all the time in the world to be looking on. Well, not all the time in the world, but I was spending some time scrolling on social media. So I'm like, if I have enough time to start scrolling on social media, I have enough time to start doing this podcast that I wanted to do from since 2018. And I'm probably going to go into one of another podcast episodes and go into more about like from when I wanted to start doing the podcast, right? Because I have it like all written down. If you know me, you know I was a project manager and I detail like everything. So I wrote this down from in like June, I think of 2018 or July, I think of 2018 that I was going to do a podcast, and it's now 2020 and now we're coming out with a podcast, right? So I had all the time in the world to be on social media and doing all these other things. So that meant that I actually had the time to start doing a podcast. So for you, whatever that thing is that you want to do, if you have the time to read, if you have the time to be on social media, if you have the time to be doing anything else that has nothing to do with work, that has nothing to do with your kids, that has nothing to do with you taking care of yourself and making sure that you're intact and your self-care is all good. If you have any time to do anything else, that means you have time to do that thing that you said that you want to do. So just go out there and do it. Like Shonda Rhimes says, if you're a writer, just write. If you're a singer, and this is me now, not Shonda Rhimes. If you're a singer, just sing. If you're a dancer, just dance. If you're an artist, just draw, just paint. Whatever it is that you do, just sculpt. Just go out there and make clay vases or whatever it is that you do. Just go out there and do it. All right. So this week's episode was Act Like a Writer and Think Like Your Reader. Not just any reader, but your reader. And next week, because it's the end of the month, we are doing book review. So at the end of the month, all the podcast episodes are going to be book reviews. And I think next week we are doing Valerie Burton's Successful Women Think Differently. And I've read this book like when I first got it probably maybe 5 or more years back, but I'm rereading it now so I can make sure I have fresh content for next week's episode. So make sure you tune in next week so you can hear about Valerie Burton's book, Successful Women Think Differently. And this is Belly, and I am going to be out. So you guys make sure you have a great week, great rest of the month. Whatever it is that you're doing, make sure you take some time out to do that thing that you want to do, that thing that you dream to do, that thing that you love to do, and stop aspiring, because we're all going to what? Drop our expired act. All right, you guys, I am out. You have been listening to another episode of Drop the Aspiring Act. If you're looking for more information on this podcast and other episodes, please visit queenbaegoals.com. That's QueenBaeGoals.com. All right, y'all. I'll see you in the next podcast.